How are you, Seth?
Oh, I'm actually doing pretty good. I have health problems. I have a lot of complicated health problems, but I'm kind of on the upside of a couple of health problems, so I'm
Oh, that's
feeling
good.
great. Yeah.
Yeah, well, hopefully all of our spiritual people will pray about that. That'll be cool. I wanted to warn people
Yes.
because I didn't really review the video I just made. I kind of AI to video really hard just now for atheism in
Yeah.
the morning, and it might be a little intense. We'll see how it goes.
Oh, dude, I can't wait.
Warning put
I
out.
believe in Spinoza's God, who reveals himself in the lawful harmony of the world, not in a God who concerns himself with the fate and the doings of mankind. In the morning light, I find my peace in the stars that shine and the endless sea. Nature's song is all I need, in every leaf and every breeze. Don't need no savior, don't need no plan, I'm just a part of this great expanse. With every sunrise I understand the universe in my own hands. The atoms whisper stars colliding, the fabric of space, the truth resides. With every particle I understand the universe in my own hands. In the whisper of the trees I hear the call, in the mountains echo I stand tall. No need for to hold me tight, I find my faith in the morning light. Don't need no savior, don't need no plan, I'm just a part of this great expanse. With every sunrise I understand the universe in my own hands. We are explorers of the dawn, unraveling mysteries we journey on. No gods above to steer our course, we find our truth in nature's form. Every heartbeat of the time, in the constellations we'll survive. In the beauty of the world, we find our way, living for today. We are the dreamers in the dawn, writing the stories as we go along. No gods above to right our wrongs, we find our strength where we belong. We are the dreamers in the dawn, writing our stories as we go along. No gods above to right our wrongs, we find our strength where we belong. In the morning light, I find my peace in the stars that shine and the endless sea. Nature's song is all I need, in every leaf and every breeze. I believe in the trees, I hear the call, in the mountains echo I stand tall. No need for myth to hold me tight, I find my faith in the morning light. In the morning light, I find my peace in the stars that shine and the endless sea. Nature's song is all I need, in every leaf and every breeze.
That was pretty intense, I feel like.
It was pretty chill. I felt relaxed. It was rocking me to sleep.
Yeah, for a pop song.
Lullaby.
Exactly. It belies the melody. That's the idea, right? Yeah. I feel like it's okay. I feel like we can get, these are the limits. I'm trying to test the limits every day.
I mean, it works for me. But
yeah, I like the Spinoza part, because that's Elon Musk's quote from when the Mormons asked him, do you believe in God? He quoted Spinoza, who said to the rabbi, I believe, because I believe in Spinoza's God. Spinoza said, I believe in the God that doesn't interfere with the nature of man, and all these things like that. So I don't know. It's interesting to me because you talk a lot about will and everything. It seemed kind of like your vibe.
Yes. Yeah, totally. Yeah. I mean, yeah,
pure blasphemy. I love it. Yeah. You gotta right.
Yeah, the interesting thing about the universe is there is a flow to it. And so, if you've got your hyperactive agency detection, you see this flow through the universe. You're like, ooh, that's a God, right? If you interpret flows as God, then okay, there's a God. But I don't think that's a valid definition of God. So that's why I don't believe in God.
I like the idea of just redefining things. I feel like, I get your vibe. It's not necessarily a single parent who writes books. That's my approach. We should probably stop making it into super anthropic God, although I'm interested in anthropic.
Dude, this is my take. Okay. My take is until people stop believing in the single parent who's writing books, then we have to be atheist with that type of a God. Once people give up on this sky daddy type of God, then I'm fine with redefining words and reorganizing society around transcendent principles or transcendent flows, right? we can probably flow towards eudaimonia or flow towards well-being. That would be great, but
Right.
not with, you know, ancient books that are completely wrong.
I just got a new book from Dave Butler, and I was kind of going to blast out because I'm really excited about it. You guys have seen Dave Butler. He's our like super cool like guy. He's got this book called The Language of Adam, and in this book he talks about kind of this differences of these different kinds of people that thought of, you know, the ancient pantheon as God being a bunch of different aspects, right?
Yeah, like psychological archetypes is one way to think about it. Like we evolve all these different propensities, and you can kind of embody an archetype, like part of your brain, the warrior aspect of the mind. You can like get into that zone, right? Get into that flow, the flow state. And you can embody the god of war, Aries, let's go, right? Or you can do the god of music, get into a different part of the brain. And there's an archetype in all these, you know, it's just psychology. It's nothing.
But they're all part of like one mind, and maybe like we're all one energy. So this whole idea of like a singularity or Yahweh, you know, where they're like, we have to get rid of all of that and just have it all be part of oneness. What do you think about that? Like either or?
Monotheism, like collapsing the pantheon into one?
I'm careful when I use words with you. I tried not to use that word specifically because I knew, just like as we just said, you would take it to like the Neoplatonist place, and we talk about monotheism. We can do that. I just first wanted to say, like, before we even get into that idea of monotheism, even just like henotheistic monolatry, the idea that there really is just one singular energy, and it's beyond, like, even if all the gods exist, they're part of this thing that's even like, you know, there's a singular blanket. What about that? Like a singular blanket. Do you believe in that?
I don't know what you mean by singular blanket, but are you talking?
Are we all one? Like, this is almost Buddhist. I'm not even getting to monotheism yet. Like,
you're talking about like a monism, like an ontological monism, that we all come from one source. That's
okay. Quantum entanglement. Do you believe in quantum entanglement? Yes.
I mean, I think you have to believe in quantum entanglement.
Really? Is it?
The Nobel Prize proved that quantum entanglement is true, right?
Well, to me. But yeah, I think a lot of people argue it.
I mean, yeah. If you don't accept the Nobel Prize, then sure.
Right. Yeah. You know, I'm glad you do. So like the idea then you would accept that we're all part of like something kind of one, like you could use the word oneness in some respect.
So I mean, I feel like there might be some baggage on the term oneness. Like I'm totally fine with a monistic substance, right? I've told you before, like I think that if we take all of like the varieties of reality, this combinatorial explosion, we can reduce it down to energy. Like everything, like there's one substance of energy. That makes sense. That energy creates everything. But I don't attribute like any special attributes. Like I don't attribute like godly agency to energy.
You think but like you believe in maybe archetypes, like you were saying earlier. You think of like the god of war, like people can be warlike, and that's archetypical.
I don't believe energy has archetypes. I believe evolved creatures have archetypes. So like a lion has the archetype of the best lion. You know, a human has the archetype of the best, you know, category of human. You know, archetypes, evolution is pushing us towards, you know, being our best so that we can survive and reproduce. And the archetype is a style. It's a type of strategy for a creature to embody. And so energy doesn't have strategies. Creatures have strategies. So
you don't think that nature produces those patterns that creatures are having strategies for? I mean,
the nature. It's a complex co-evolution, right? Nature is kind of randomly, you know, morphing over time, and then we have to like evolve to like fit nature. And there are certain strategies that help us fit nature better than others, and that's where the archetypes come in.
Right. All right. You also had thoughts. You want? Oh, go ahead. Sorry.
Yeah. So just a philosophical distinction: emergence versus, you know, fundamentality. I would put the archetypes at the emergent level. So it's like all of the building blocks of evolution have to build us towards an archetype. It doesn't start at the bottom.
Okay, that seems pretty reasonable. So like, yeah, we should get back into that, talking about intelligences, like primordial intelligences later. But I think we should talk more about consciousness, because I know you kind of woke up with this sort of epiphany thought. I think that would be good to. We should talk about that probably now.
I need to get this off my chest. You have no idea.
Yeah.
I feel like consciousness is such a complex topic that it's almost like I need to rewind the context, and I need to like. There's like a meta conversation. It's like we need to talk about what consciousness is, get people on the same page, and then like narrow down into my theory of consciousness. You know
right? Because that's the thing. It's not the monadic reality. It's not like this universal archetypical. You're not saying that there's you're saying archetypes are emergent. So it's not this eternal intelligences. What is consciousness to you? Right? Yeah.
Yeah. So yeah, I lean heavily towards reductionism, which is basically the philosophy that everything can be broken down into its building blocks. So like a complex human is made of all the building blocks of the atoms, and within the human is a complex consciousness, and that consciousness can be broken down into tiny units of consciousness. And so those tiny units are often called qualia in philosophy. Qualia are the units, and qualia is etymologically similar to quality, right? So there's quantity and there's quality. So the atoms, the materials, are the quantity. I have X quantity of atoms, and then inside my brain, inside my nerves, inside my body, I've got all these qualities: the quality of color, the quality of green, the quality of chocolate, the quality of, the taste, the sound, all these different qualities. The hard problem of consciousness is trying to figure out the relationship. How does quantity have a relationship with quality? Like, does one create the other, or vice versa? What's going on with this? Yeah, it's a very ambiguous relationship. And the hard problem has not been solved, which is how that relationship works. But there's a lot of things we do know about consciousness. Neuroscience has been absolutely amazing at just teaching us tons of stuff about consciousness. And I think there's if you learn about evolution, you learn about psychology, you learn about neuroscience, you learn about biology, you learn about chemistry, you learn about physics. Once you have like this constellation of understanding, you can kind of consciousness is the gap, right? We know about this, we know about all this. And it's like you can kind of start to read between the lines, and there's little clues. It's like physics has a clue about consciousness, biology has a clue, and we start to aggregate and organize all these clues, and it starts funneling us towards a theory of consciousness. That's what
a silhouette. All right.
Yeah, because it's such a tricky problem because it's almost untestable, right? In a way, it's not scientifically testable, but there are things that we can test. So the most important neuroscientific thing to understand is neural stimulation. Neural stimulation. I mean, everyone should know about this. It's so important. Basically, you can basically insert a needle into your brain, and you can stab a specific neuron with the needle, and you can hook the system up to an external battery. You can press a button, you can zap, through the needle, you can create a flow of electricity that zaps and stimulates this neuron. And what happens when a neuron is stimulated? It outputs its neurotransmitters. So it creates a flow through your brain. You can artificially create consciousness within people's brains by artificial stimulation. So the important thing about that is it shows a causal relationship, right? If I press this button, I create this experience. That's literally causation. I do this and I cause that, right? If I don't press the button, you don't get that experience, right? So because there's a causal relationship between the materials, right? We don't understand, like, if I zap you with all these materials, you get this qualitative experience. Okay, but how does quantity translate into quality? We know that one causes the other. The materials cause the consciousness, but we don't know how, right? That's the confusing part. And so I'm starting to develop a theory for how this works, a way to solve the hard problem of consciousness.
I'm listening.
Do you have any thoughts on that so far?
I mean, yeah, it's interesting. So you need to do it that way. So I still believe that we have a primordial consciousness and everything. So from one end of it, people feel like it's what faith, like people are like, oh, I believe in it, but that's not good enough. I think it's important that people should be working from the other direction to figure out all the truths, the material truths about the thing. There's nothing wrong with knowing that, right? Like I think it's a good thing. So
when you say primordial consciousness, do you mean like you think that there's a intelligent mind that's at the beginning, at the foundation?
Yeah. I think that kind of accounts for the idea of God as well. Like this idea that everything that exists, space and time, as it expands outwards and as it continues, this idea of time, that eventually that this is all inside of and made of the thing that's thinking it or that's being it, both, right? And so the being it includes sensorial awareness and accumulation that's beyond time, because time is in it. So everything that it knows is actually like known from the end to the beginning as it happens, right? So we're still moving forward, but that information is accumulated by something that's beyond time and able to like interact with it in ways we can't comprehend or perceive, which, that's explained by 10-dimensional string theory. It makes kind of the most sense to me. Like that time is symmetrical, right? Like time is just symmetries itself.
Yeah, I don't have a huge issue with symmetry of time, but I do have a huge issue with like a fundamental intelligent mind that's primordial. So I'm curious because you have a software background, so I feel like you could understand where I'm coming from. So I'm very curious what your response to this is, right? Like we've already designed intelligence within software, right? You're using algorithms to build these intelligent videos, music, like GPT. It's all algorithmic, right?
Right.
So to me, intelligence requires algorithms. Like that's how I view intelligence. Like you don't have intelligence without an algorithm, and algorithms require building blocks. You need like chain, if then. You need
Right.
all of these structural building blocks that give you the algorithm. And so for me, you can't, I mean,
Right.
to
The
me,
thing needs the thing needs a calculation in order to learn. So it's an interesting proposition because it kind of means at very least whatever this God is or an atheistic universe, creator relationship is, that thing is reflective rather than just constant. Like the idea that it knows everything forever is only plausible if it's constantly learning, but it's able to learn everything and use that from the beginning of time.
yeah.
Because it's outside of time. So even though inside of time, at the end of the day, it learns something, now it can use that at the beginning of those days, which if you think of software, this is like if I play a video game and then I go back to a save state and I run through it again, right?
Yeah.
So I feel like that's also not the way a lot of people look at God. They don't think of God as something that's reflective, like something that learns. But I think that that's an essential part.
Okay, so that's an interesting way to think about God. But here's my issue. Tell me if you can address this part of my issue. It's like if an intelligent mind is at the beginning, but intelligent minds require algorithms, and algorithms require either a design or an evolutionary process to operate on materials, then to me, it's like you can't say the intelligent mind is first. Like the algorithm comes before the mind, and the evolution comes before the algorithms, and the materials come before the evolution. And so the materials come first. So how does the intelligent mind come first if it doesn't come first?
Because even the materials fall into the patterns. So the patterns come first, right? So like the DNA is a really interesting example because a lot of people argued about if evolution was plausible without any sort of intelligent design. But as we look at DNA, from its very inception, like as ribonucleic acid develops, it's super sophisticated, right? So there's something already super sophisticated that goes back. And then when we start to break apart subatomic particles and then we see how pentaquarks are arranged, these arrangements are these, like you can find the same patterns if you go into an Islamic mosque and you look at the arabesque patterns, right? These are geometric arcs that are produced by entropy. So these are essentially the same symbols that they use to represent our subatomic particles. So there really are like natural patterns which emerge, like double helix and everything. Even the idea of the double helix is interesting, right? Like it was a Rosicrucian who took acid and he was like thinking about DNA. He hadn't had the opportunity to see DNA at that point. He was imaging it based on like ISIS, right? And like these ideas of esoteric. So I feel like ideas themselves, there's something to that. Granted, you need to have things, objects, sensorial information to, like, you can't have a dream without being able to have memories that you're putting together in your dream. So thoughts are built on building blocks. I agree with that, but I still think that patterns are probably first.
So yeah, I think I can accept that patterns come first, but minds would not come first. Do you have an issue with that?
I think in like the material world that we experience, I don't really know enough about like the beginning, like pre-cosmogony. Like we don't understand what things were like before or what things are outside of space-time enough to know what it is. Like, because it could be like we're in a simulation theory. Like there's not enough evidence to say we're not. So the idea that this is I'm
highly skeptical, but that's fine.
Yeah, I'm more skeptical, I think. But the idea also of it being a stimulation theory, like that's a very Gnostic idea, right? Like the Matrix isn't really a simulation theory because they're living in a real world, but they stimulate a false reality, right? And that's a very Gnostic and Eastern concept. That's a very ancient concept.
That's like a Descartesian demon hallucination.
Yeah, and like if that's not true today, that's certainly true for kids to play with their meta headsets, and will be true for many people in a decade. So I mean, we're headed towards that one way or another.
Dude, yeah, it's gonna be so weird if people like it probably shouldn't ever be done, but if someone was raised completely in VR, that would be a very interesting experiment.
Don't say that here with to trademark that idea right now. Trademark. This is a movie that we're now making. Seth has written the script. He's written already.
So someone on YouTube, someone on YouTube was making a series where they filmed themselves in VR 24/7 for X. Yeah,
I saw that guy. That was crazy. That can't be good for your head unless you're using like LED.
It seems And as the quality increases, it's probably going to be less healthy because it's more believable. You know what I mean? I don't know.
So you want to test out, I mean, and Albert Pike talked about this, like you need to have atheists that are digging the other direction so that things are reached. So we reach a point of understanding mysteries. So how do you want, what's your plan for your plan for understanding conscious more?
So like epistemology, or do you want me to go the epistemology route or get into my theory, my epiphanies of the day, or both?
I mean, obviously both. We got time.
Well, okay. So I'll probably just talk the theory first and then talk epistemology. That's probably a better flow.
Okay.
Flow, man. Flow is the Tao, right? Tao is the only type of God that I can get on board with, right?
I mean, the Tao is pretty much, the Tao is, I think that's where
the Tao. See, I'm all about bottom up as opposed to top down. The Tao is like a bottom up, like.
I think it's a bit of a toroid. It's a bit of a toroid there. It's like as opposed to below.
Is there a top down element to the Tao? I've never heard of that.
Yeah. I mean, it is because it's the way.
Please.
It's
don't
subjective.
ruin the Tao for me. Please don't ruin it. I can't accept top down causation.
It's a relation. Everything's a relationship. Like there can't be one without the other. It's the Tao. Yeah. It's the yin yang.
Okay. All right. Okay. Consciousness. Okay. So we got the paradigm. I call this paradigm energism, right? So monism versus dualism. Dualism means there's two substances. So people say, oh, quantity and quality, materials and consciousness. Reality has two substances. That's dualism. Some people say there's my body and my spirit. That's dualism. I don't accept spirits because that's top down in nature. But I think that qualia is bottom up, so I can accept qualia. But I think that instead of like a dualism, I do a Russellian monism, right? Monism, there's one substance. So energy is the singular substance. And so everything reduces to energy. But energy can transform. And so we can transform energy into gravity, electromagnetism, the strong force, the weak force, heat, kinetic energy, blah, blah, blah. Energy transforms into materials, right? All of matter is energy. That's E equals mc squared, Einsteinian, physics. So I'm just proposing, like under energism, my proposal is that in addition to all this other stuff energy can transform into, energy can also transform into the color red, the color blue, the color green, the color yellow, the sound of good music, the sound of bad music, the taste of chocolate, the taste of vanilla, right? The smell of something foul. So energy can transform into qualities or quantities. So both of them reduce to energy. And with energism, it creates an interesting paradigm where the materials have a relationship to the qualities, right? The quantity does have a relation, and that's what we're looking for with the hard problem. We're trying to look for the relationship. Well, energy is the conversion mechanism. So your material, E equals mc squared, you can convert this material into energy, and that energy can convert to consciousness. And so metabolism is the process of extracting energy out of materials. And what does life do? Life is consuming materials, extracting out the energy. What do they do with that energy? Well, they use it for kinetic purposes to power the system, but maybe they also use the energy to generate qualitative data, and that qualitative data can be used to model the environment, and then they can make decisions based on their model of the environment, right? So if we use the qualities to understand the external world, then we can survive better, and so there's a evolutionary reason to dedicate some of the energy to generating some models, right? Now, a little correlating data is that the brain metabolizes a lot of energy, right? The brain is an expensive organ. I believe it weighs 2% of our mass, but it costs 20% of our energy. So it's 10 times as expensive as the average component of your body. So the brain, it's doing a lot of work, and so it's processing a lot of energy. And so that's kind of a clue that maybe it's using that energy to generate this picture of the world. Okay, so if you can accept all of that, then we got to zoom in further. It's like, okay, maybe there's like an energetic relationship between matter and consciousness. Maybe we can convert, and maybe we can design, algorithms that say, okay, if we have this process, then we're going to generate, redness. And if we have this process, we're going to generate green, right? And it's optimal. If we see green things, we go towards it because we're an herbivore. And if we see blue things, we go towards it if we're thirsty because that's water. We can optimize our decision trees based on conscious data. So that seems like evolutionarily reasonable, at least to me. Okay, so now zooming in on the neuroscience, right? Okay, how does this happen? Like, let's get more granular. So, okay, the front of the brain is the prefrontal cortex. The front of the brain is, stereotyped as the place that has self-control. It's the place that does a lot of logic. It does a lot of planning for the future. It makes decisions. It often, the prefrontal cortex, it does the hard decision. So the hard decision is self-discipline, right? Have you heard of the, what is it called? The grit test, I believe, the marshmallow test. They did an experiment on kids where they gave marshmallows to the kids, but they said you can have one marshmallow now, or you can be patient and have 2 marshmallows later, right? That's a test of self-control. That's prefrontal cortex action. If you have a strong prefrontal cortex, you have the ability to delay gratification in order to get a future benefit, right?
Those kids, wow.
Yeah, and that's predictive. Like prefrontal cortex, the power of your prefrontal cortex is predictive of wealth, lots of things, because self-control is very valuable. And so, okay, so the point is the front of the brain does your decisions, right? But how do you do a decision? You need to collect all of your data to make a decision, right? So you need the data, you need your visual data, like what is going on? Okay, here's a marshmallow, right? Well, where is your visual data? The visual data is at the back of the brain, the very back. And so in order to make a decision based on your visual data, all of that consciousness, right, the visual consciousness, the qualia, those little pixels, right? So maybe the back of the brain is generating all these pixels of data. All of those pixels need to travel all the way across the brain. And that's actually a big journey. There's 80 billion neurons in the brain.
What part of the brain is the, what about the smart part of the brain that like realizes that one marshmallow is more than enough? Like, is that like the side of the brain?
Yeah, that's future-oriented thinking. So if you accept the marshmallow based on a future idea, like, oh, I want to be healthy for the future, that's the prefrontal cortex is making a future-based decision.
Fair enough.
And so you can reject the marshmallow based on the future, or you can accept the marshmallow based on the future. Both of that would be prefrontal. Okay. So the point is that somehow all of these pixels need to traverse this distance across your brain, which is not trivial. So what is going on in the brain fundamentally? Have you studied much neuroscience?
Yeah, it's been a minute, but yeah.
So like basically all of these flows, they reduce to it's like it goes back and forth between there's neurotransmitters. So neurotransmitters hook up to a receptor, right? So there's like a chemical reaction between neurotransmitters and receptors, and then that triggers an electrical pulse down the axon. So there's like a tentacle of the neuron. So it's like chemicals energize the neuron, and then sodium, the electricity, it's interesting. It's not, normally we think of electricity as based on negative ions of electrons, you know what I mean? Like our machines are based on negative ions, but actually the brain is based on positive ions. It's based on sodium. So it's a positive flow of sodium that goes through the axon, through the tentacle, right? And then at the end of the tentacle, it outputs neurotransmitters. So it goes from electricity back to like chemicals. So it's like chemicals, electricity, chemicals, electricity, chemicals, electricity. So it's a little bit bipolar, or it goes back and forth between 2 modes, right? And like the neurotransmitters are on, so in your visual cortex, you've got neurotransmitters that start the pixel process. And then you've got electricity, and then you have a new set of neurotransmitters, and then you have a new set of electricity, you have a new set of neurotransmitters. So the point is none of the materials are traveling, right? It's too far of a distance. So the sodium isn't going from the back of your brain to the front of your brain. The dopamine is not going from the back of your brain to the front. The serotonin, the oxytocin, none of the neurotransmitters are traversing the entire distance of your brain, right? So how does the pixel travel if none of the materials are traveling? That's the question. That's the question I was pondering this morning. Do you have any thoughts on that?
Like lighting alarms and seeing, like, torch lighting. So one is reacting to another reaction all along the way, like a little like the telephone game.
Yeah. So I mean, there's a computational interpretation of neuroscience, which I think a lot of more atheistic people like to invoke, but I don't really accept the computational interpretation of neuroscience. And that's because I don't, so, okay, let me explain what I mean. Computation like machine computation, right? Software computation is based on ones and zeros, right? It's based on math, basically, right? I don't think that can give you consciousness because there's not enough diversity within ones and zeros, right?
Well, is it hexadecimals really? Because you've got like, DNA or multiple serotonin, melatonin, GABA. You have all these different neurotransmitter metatonins that are available. So you end up having, at least a range of 4 pixels, right? It's not just 1 and 0.
So yeah, with the brain has more diversity. So yes, for the brain, I think that there is possibility for consciousness within the brain, but I don't think there's the possibility for like qualia within a computational model of just ones and zeros. So if the way you think about the brain is ones and zeros, I don't think that works for explaining consciousness in the brain. That's what I'm trying to say. So I'm saying we have to transcend the ones and zeros to get consciousness. We need a better, more diverse perspective on the ontology of what's going on in the brain.
Okay, so you know about hexadecimal, right?
Yeah.
Okay, so even just doing like systems of 4 and 16, right? 8-bit cycles, right? Half eighths. Like you can pretty much turn ones and zeros into ATCGs, or any number of different references could be made. So how you can do, I don't know. I think you could. I think it's not as hard as it sounds to use math to create that probability.
Okay, let's go down this rabbit hole because a lot of people think the way you do. So it's worth addressing, right? So in my opinion, the fundamental problem is there's a difference in kind, right? There's a categorical error here, right? So when I say quality, it's quantity versus quality, right? When you talk math, you're talking quantities, right? So like
no, because with
yeah,
because you're using quantities only to make qualities. So you're saying like if I send a hex that's this hex, this means this. If I send a hex that means like this could be your name, this could be your girlfriend's number, this could be a lot of things, bro. A hex could mean a lot of things. Yeah. It could be adenosine, thymine, cytosine, and guanine. It could be whatever you want it to be. So I think mathematics, symbolic math, right?
But like when you say, oh, this combination of numbers could be anything, that's actually a problem, not that doesn't help your theory, that hurts your theory.
No, because then you have really specific things to look out for, especially if there's only a few to remember, right? Like
really?
Yeah, because in the old days people could remember phone numbers and they could remember their friends' phone numbers, right? So I feel like if you had like 4 or 16 that you had to remember, you probably could. And like who knows what system we're talking about, but I imagine something that's with the DNA, they literally make different colors, right? When we look at like the phosphor, and because of the different materials, right? The different part density. So there's different ways that you could sense that, whether it's because of the material or because of the size of the explosion.
Okay. I know I'm going to persuade you on this point. We just have to get to the bottom of this because I know that you understand enough software and enough math that I can persuade you.
Okay.
So think of it this way. In a machine, right? In a software, let's talk simulation, right? This is actually a problem with simulation theory. Where in your software is the color red for your simulation? Right?
So,
or like Grand Theft Auto, there's some blood on the ground. Where does that red come from in your software ontology?
So the data is sent to a specific processing unit, which is like, okay, I know there's a range of things I'm supposed to know. And this is called a video graphics processing unit, right? And so the video card will then say, okay, I know it's probably not a major computation. It's probably something within like this range. And realistically, the questions I'm being asked are, is this red or not? No. Okay. Is this green or not? No. Okay. Is this blue or not? Yes. And it does that.
You already made a category error.
Well,
it doesn't say is this red or not. It says is this 011001110.
Yeah, but we all know that that's red.
Oh, do we?
Yeah, if we're a video card, there's like 3 or 4 video cards that are designed to do that.
So if I take your brain and if I like stab a needle in your brain and I do a frequency 011001110, are you gonna feel a pixel of redness? Is that the ontological definition of redness?
It's not the same for a video card as a person, I guess. Is that what you're trying to get at, or what?
Oh, I'm saying if you posit that 011001 is a
it's symbolic. It's symbolic language.
Okay, it's symbolic, which means it needs to be translated. The symbol gets translated into red. So it isn't red. It's an arbitrary representative of red, which is not red.
Agreed.
In software, I think before you were saying, oh, these things could represent anything. That's exactly right. You could pick any combination of numbers and you could define it as I'm defining this as red, right? Red doesn't have to be 0110. It could be 0001 or it could be 11111. So none of the quantity defines the redness?
Symbolic language is used in systems. So those systems that you've talked about, which have emerged, are designed to pick up on, and to react by saying. So if something says, okay, we just got the signal, and it says, okay, I know what that signal represents, then it sends the signal forward to the next part of the body, right? So all of a sudden you're experiencing red because of this signal. So it's getting the message to the right person, and that person knows how to decrypt the data.
Exactly. The decryption process is the key. You have to convert the data into redness, because it's not redness until you convert it. That's the point I'm trying to get across.
Okay.
In the computational model, there's no such thing as redness. There's just arbitrary identifiers of redness until it gets translated into redness later on.
Yes.
Right?
Okay. Yeah. So your experience, this is stimulation versus simulation. Like, your experience is not the same as the initial stimuli.
Right. And where in a software, so for a video game, right? Where does that conversion take place between quantity to quality, between zeros and ones to redness? Where is the ontological transition?
You're talking video game. Not in software, but in hardware, or you're talking about in hardware and software? Where?
Well, pick your poison. Where do you think, like, it has to translate at some point? Where do you think it translates?
I mean, so once the video signal is sent out, like, it's sending out signal to your display monitor, right? So it's in the video card, right?
So what is the video card doing?
So the video card is taking the signal, which is telling it which shade and hue, and then it's breaking that into, like, the possible 64 or more colors, right? And then it's printing them out in a sequence of red, green, blue, right? Which are just 3, or black. So then there's like 4 choices.
So my understanding is that what's going on is that it's looking for the address of a piece of hardware, right? Depending on your monitor, there's little pieces of hardware that are emitting photons of light. If you put the electricity into the piece of hardware, it's going to emit green. And if you put a piece of electricity into a different piece of the hardware, it's going to emit a pixel of red. And so what the video card is doing is it's pointing the electricity to the address of the correct piece of hardware, and the correct piece of hardware is converting electricity into photon. And photon doesn't even have redness. Photons don't have color. Your eyeball absorbs the photon, then your eyeball and brain convert the photon into color. So actually, the point of transition is in your body.
Oh, okay, that's fair.
And so actually, there's no color anywhere along this process.
Yeah, it's all, agreed. It's all electric universe theory. Sure.
Right.
Totally
and
true.
So if reality is a simulation, if it's impossible for simulations to have color, then there's no color inside simulation theory. And so just the fact that we have color is a big problem for simulation theory.
I don't know, the way they've addressed light shading in video games. Like, you should look into Unreal and like how they're able to make things look ultra realistic now. I feel like there's gradients, right? That's the thing. It's all illusion. It's still illusion, but you can experience it. There's probably reasons why we don't experience more color. Like, when we look at blue, and blue is so much of a spectrum that's blocked out, and it should probably be like as much of a rainbow in blue alone, right? But yeah, I think that there's something to that. Like, I think that there's something to the idea that we have a limited experience of this illusion that's based around something that is objective that we can't really interact with. So we're living like this like lie simultaneous. Yeah, I agree with that. I think a lot of like spiritual people would agree with that too.
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
So to rewind this conversation back, the point I was getting is this whole computation thing, zeros and ones, none of that gives you consciousness, because the translation mechanism is what gives you consciousness.
Okay.
And so
that's interesting. Yeah.
And so if we're trying to understand the consciousness in the brain, we need to give up on computation and we need to look for translation. How do we translate these patterns into experience, right?
So I agree, because obviously, like, it's like why people say artists need to be human, or the audience at least does, because something needs to find meaning in the art, right? And so like the AI that doesn't find real meaning, it's just like translating. But I think translation, I mean, that's the thing. If some signal is being given and then it's translating that and sending on another signal, like, that is kind of a primordial translation, right? That's not quite the same as seeing the color, but it's it's something.
Are you saying like the computation transmission?
Yeah, because it's taking one thing in, it's putting another thing out. I mean, I guess it's not the same as like experiencing the color red.
Right.
But it's still a lot, right? I mean, isn't it?
When you say a lot, you mean you can do a lot with computation?
Yeah, I mean, you can create.
Yeah. Dude, GPT, GPT does tons of stuff, and that's all computation in my book.
It's not. But you don't. Yeah, it's not quite seeing red in your opinion. But I don't know. I feel like I want to look into that more because if you put AI, I mean, you can. They have cameras. They have AI that can play video games and can see the difference between. It's not colorblind, so it's able to tell the difference between something that should be red and something that should be blue. I mean, that's something, right?
You're saying if you give GPT a photo, it can detect color? Is that what you mean?
Yeah.
Yeah, but like the file type, it has, you know, unique identifiers for each pixel, so it can infer color based on the identifiers in the file, right?
Yeah, so it knows about what color is.
So just computationally processing ones and zeros in a file and inferring color is not the same as seeing a pixel of red. You know what I mean?
Yeah, but like if it can live in like a virtual world and it can, you know, prefer red flowers, it starts to get really close, you know? It's like it quacks like a duck.
I mean, yeah, like it's getting it's getting pretty close to passing the Turing test if it hasn't already. So yeah, I agree with you there. But I guess I don't think that there's a good reason to say computation gives you qualia.
I think it's just that it's still really early. Like you were talking about the energy it takes to run the human brain, and like the human brain uses a lot, but it's really only like as much as a light bulb uses, right? To run it, a single thought, a single token on ChatGPT takes as much energy as the human brain uses in a day, right? Just all day long. Yeah. Like if you were thinking a lot, like before a test for like 20 hours straight. So I mean, the human mind is really efficient, but that is all chemical computation. So maybe it's just that AI needs to be using chemical computations to be more efficient. And as we get to a higher resolution, we'll get to the same experience.
That's kind of where my hypothesis is leading me, is that this qualia is a more efficient computation mechanism.
Yeah, I agree with that for sure.
Instead of having 1,000 neurons calculating an image, just have one neuron pass the feeling of an image through the system, right?
Yeah, there are problems with it. Like obviously the way when we look at some of our organs and we think like, man, like you could do a lot with this. It's crazy how little we're getting out of our eyes, right? Or something like that. And it's not just the eye's fault. It's where we end up taking all the data from our nervous system and compressing it, right? And so like you get the gist of something, which is this really bad, low resolution, like real audio file from the 90s version of your life. And that's what you're experiencing, which is crazy also because that's still based on your senses not being perfect, you know? And so what is red? Like, I think that's a great example because there's all these stories about like the sky used to be far more colorful, right? Like the way your sky looks during the daytime, you would constantly just see rainbows and like stars and things like that. But those colors are just, we can't see them anymore, right?
What kind of testimony evidence are you appealing to here?
It's like Madame Blavatsky stuff. Or also the sky is blue is like a, you know, isn't it like Homer's Odyssey? Like he couldn't see, like a lot of people were colorblind to the color blue. So it's like, it's built up its own little like urban legend background, but it's a good myth, right? The idea that we could see more colors instead of less at some point. There are people that can't. There are people in like Siberia, women that have like extra rods and cones in their eyes and can experience
right.
millions more.
Yeah. Right.
Probably not useful. It probably would freak you out, you know?
I think you wouldn't even notice. I mean, how are you supposed to know if you see the world differently from someone else?
Right. Well, I mean, I feel like evolutionarily, if people don't do it more, and a lot of people, like people who are colorblind or good hunter and gatherers, then it might not be, you know, an advantage to have more data. It seems to me that people that are more simple are happier in a lot of ways, right? And so maybe just having the gist of the I mean, that seems like what you see a lot of people that are really good hunter and gatherers and trackers and things like that, but they're not like worried about philosophy and existentialism and epistemology, but they're pretty good with their body, like hand-eye coordination and everything.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah. For sure. There's trade-offs to everything, but it seems like humanity is evolving in the direction of bring it on. Like, let's do this. Let's calculate everything because we're insane.
I think the idea that we can do it externally is cool. Like, so, you know, for instance, acute schizophrenia and psychedelics were really fascinating in the 20th century for a lot of people that are looking into what we could do with that. And I think now it's going to be really interesting that people would be able to experience those states through Neuralink on and off like a light switch if they wanted to, or that you could have experiences downloaded, or that you could, these things are going to change. Like if you had a really traumatic experience that you could delete or something like that, who knows? Also, like we've talked about in the past, like military and police state, if somebody committed a crime and instead of going to jail, like you neural linked them and erased their criminal mindset and made them someone who really liked to pick up trash on the highway and like right
reprogramming people.
Yeah, like there's going to be really interesting things that happen because, the burden also of being the person in the village that was kind of crazy, but useful for their mindset. Like there's a burden of them not being very practical in society. So we're going to have to see also like how much do they care if you're practical in nature, in society? Do you have to be able to socialize, or can you be an integrated person in the system? I think that's also like an emergent idea. Like what if you were just like, when AI needs to calculate something, it uses people, it downloads into someone, you're paid to use your body to process hormone experiences and emotions, for AI.
Oh, that's weird. Like a symbiosis, like us helping. Are you saying we're helping?
Like, let's say AI needs to watch the Sound of Music, and it needs to watch it and feel something. So it takes your mind, and then it puts you into a hypnotic state where you forget who you are, brings you up through this Blade Runner youth that you are this like sweet little girl that like loves everyone, and then has that mindset installed in you for long enough to watch the Sound of Music, feels through your hormones like stress, like worry, like love, admiration, and then puts you back, and then now has all of the calculations about what it feels like to react to this and that.
That would be nuts if AI could incorporate all of that into its system. That would be pretty impressive.
That's what's coming.
So I think this is a perfect segue into the next aspect of my epiphany this morning. So there's kind of so in the brain, it seems like there's the receptors are important to this process. The neurotransmitters are important, and the electricity is important, right? That seems kind of like the main stuff that's going on. It's like we output some neurotransmitters, we absorb some neurotransmitters, we do some electricity, repeat the process. And so it's like, okay, if the fundamental algorithm of the brain is, neurotransmitter, electricity, neurotransmitter, then if conscious qualitative experience is traveling across the brain, then it has to be traveling through this algorithmic structure, right? Like somehow neurotransmitters, electricity, and a different set of neurotransmitters are carrying conscious experience. Either consciousness is being carried, or there's a central hub where it's being generated. I think I lean a little bit more towards consciousness being carried through the brain, because I think different parts of the brain are processing. So like one part, like the visual data, it gets processed over here in the language side. The visual data gets processed in the prefrontal cortex decision side. The vision data gets processed in the fear section of the brain in the middle. The visual data gets processed at the reward section in the middle. So the visual data has to get processed everywhere. And so I think that it's traveling everywhere. And so you need a theory for how the conscious data of the vision can travel. And so here's the absolutely nuts theory, which I don't know, I call the neurotransmitter theory of consciousness. Okay. So can we pull up a image of a neurotransmitter, Andreas?
Yeah, I think I still have one up. Hold on, let me see here.
That should be easy to find, right?
Here you go. Is this oldie but a goodie? This looks like something from like 1999, but
I want something more zoomed in, like a dopamine, the molecular structure of a dopamine.
Okay. This is not. I want some a little bit bigger than that. I don't want to be that close.
Give me the bubble formation of a dopamine. There, the ball.
You're happy with this? You just want to get that close?
Yeah.
All right,
That's pretty good. Okay, so these within molecules, we have electrons.
Let's do a cooler one. Keep going.
Okay, so one of the things to understand about molecules is that electrons kind of like flow. They kind of are shared amongst atoms. You know what I mean? So like you can kind of think of the atoms as a more rigid, like the protons are a more rigid structure, and then the electrons are a more liquid. They're slightly more liquidy in that they flow around the structure, right? So I think it's useful to kind of think in terms of how solidified these things are. There's a gradation between some things are more solid than others, right? And so energy is the most fluid, right? So back to the monism, we've got materials which are solidified, And if you melt the materials, you get the liquid. This is a metaphor, obviously. The liquid is the energy, and the liquid is what transforms, right? And so electrons are closer to this raw energy. They're a little bit solidified energy, but they're closer to this raw energy component, right? And we know electrons can produce light. So you can get the electron to transform into new things, right? So matter can transform into other types of energy. And so what I'm saying is, within this molecular structure of dopamine, I think there might be a possibility for consciousness to be stored inside the molecule, right? A low resolution pixel of consciousness, right? Maybe a pixel of redness could be stored inside the dopamine, and it could just float around with the electrons. The electrons are moving around, and there's this invisible redness that's flowing around with the electrons.
Yeah, I jive with that. That's probably right.
Right. And it's, it's probably going to be a really simple type of consciousness, because this is really small stuff. And the interesting thing is I
just want to comment on that, because it's interesting. Sure. We just were pulling up different molecules and melatonins, and so you can think of melatonin and dopamine, but like tryptamine is an interesting one, right? Because everyone associates that with like DMT, and a lot of people are like afraid of psychedelics, right? But the thing is, it's just in your brain, and if you run a lot and you do a lot of track, you're probably going to breathe a lot. And when you sleep, you're probably going to have dreams. And those dreams are probably going to be influenced by tryptamines. And those tryptamines are in nature in all plants. But it's pretty cool that there's a eukaryote that we're part of called Opisthokonta that includes all mycelial life. And that the fungi that use the same melatonin tryptamines, that those tryptamines are, exactly like we've talked about this at some point. It's interesting that one part of a mycelial net can send data through tryptamine directly to another part, like single cell wall thick, all the way miles, and it'll have the exact same tryptamine response. So it's like a giant brain, and it's able to have the exact, that's a huge amount of data, right? Because it's an entire existential experience. So you could consider that to be related to consciousness on like a grand scheme.
Yeah, like what you're bringing up is that's an important and relevant data point. It's like, what are psychedelics doing? Psychedelics like blow up your brain with conscious experience. Where did that come from? Well, the psychedelics are playing with your receptors, right? They're neurotransmitters that are going in, hooking up to your receptor. So if the neurotransmitter is a source of, if it's encapsulating a piece of consciousness, if it gets delivered to the receptor, my hypothesis is that the receptor extracts the consciousness out of the neurotransmitter. And that's how it travels, right? Because if it's going to travel a long distance, it starts in a neurotransmitter, it gets extracted out, and then it floats around in the neuron. And guess what? The electrical flow it looks like it's pushing things, right? When the sodium comes into the neuron, it pushes everything out. And so it pushes all of that little liquid of consciousness, it shoves it out the tentacle, and then it gets reabsorbed onto the next neuron. And so it goes from neuron to neuron through it being encapsulated by these neurotransmitters.
But even these neurotransmitters are just like chemical envelopes, which dissolve.
Exactly. So it's going from one neurotransmitter to the next. It's switching vehicles. It's like, here's my first vehicle. Okay, extraction. Electricity pushes me to the next vehicle. I get inside a vehicle, go to the next neuron, and then electricity pushes me again. And the neurons have the capacity to, it only pushes the consciousness if you reach an action potential. And so there's computation that you can do a little bit of computation and say, is this a useful piece of consciousness? If it's useful, electrify, push it through. If it's not useful, we can suppress the neuron and say, okay, we're not operating on this piece of consciousness, right? And so the computation synergizes with the qualities. You can operate on different qualities with these computational algorithms. And so all you have to do is, now that you have a paradigm, you can explain, okay, the energy creates the fundamental units of consciousness. Now we have a mechanism where the neurotransmitters can carry, and now we can play the algorithms out. And so the algorithms, okay, let's collect all of these pixels. We've got vision. Let's collect all of this auditory signal. Now we've got hearing. Let's collect all of this odor signal, and now we've got olfaction. And so this kind of bridges the hard problem of consciousness is bridged by understanding that energy is the translation mechanism and neurotransmitters are the vehicle, right?
Yeah, I think neurotransmitters are definitely that is true. That is how we experience our material reality, through neurotransmitters. And we limit the amount we have, because if we had too much, we'd be insane. So we would reduce consciousness on purpose.
Yeah. Now this type of a theory has some really odd implications that are probably testable, right? So, like, okay, let's say you eat a psychedelic mushroom, right? Well, maybe that mushroom has a bunch of memories stored inside of its neurotransmitters, right?
Right.
Maybe
Exactly.
the mushroom has its own consciousness tied up inside its own neurotransmitters. Well, once you eat the mushroom, you're processing, foreign data, foreign consciousness is getting processed. And so what does that mean? Does that mean you're interfacing with an alien consciousness, that you're absorbing alien data to you?
It's just an undocumented worker.
Is that what it is? So I guess there's a potential to explore, like, if neurotransmitters are the vehicle of consciousness, well, can we hijack this process? Can we implant memories in people by giving them? Can we engineer a neurotransmitter to communicate what we want to communicate? You know what I mean? Like, how do we, like, this gives us a direction to actually do crazy stuff with consciousness.
Only if we spend, billions and billions of dollars developing SSRIs and testing them on the youth of America.
Oh,
how else would we be able to do it unless we had selective serotonin reuptake inhibitors? We wouldn't know.
Dude, I react negatively to SSRIs.
Well, obviously, they're not designed to help you. Like, they're designed, like, we just talked about this. They're designed literally to study what happens when you take selective serotonin reuptake inhibitors. Like, when you inhibit it.
Yeah.
What you think you're gonna do? I don't know.
Dude, I have the opposite of depression. I'm super lucky.
Ask your doctor what's right for you. Sorry.
I have a lot of empathy for people with depression, because to me that just sounds super shitty to just be tortured by your own mind. You know what I mean? I'm lucky because I have the opposite of that. I have lots of natural positive emotion, like, for absolutely no reason. Like, I have lots of health problems. Like, a normal person would be like, "Oh wow, Seth, your life sucks. You should be depressed." I'm like, no. But dude, I have lots of back pain, and my doctor suggested SSRIs because they have a dual effect of depression and helping with back pain.
And your doctor has, like, stock in Pfizer. Yeah.
I tried like 1 or 2 days of SSRIs. It gave me depression. Like, holy crap, I don't want this.
Weird. Sorry.
Yeah. So yeah,
guys, it's like, you should really trust your doctors.
All
right. Cool. Yeah. I think, though, that it's like really interesting when you look at melatonin research. Particularly the Soviets did a lot of really interesting research with melatonins and tryptamines. They had a lot of medicines like alpha-methyltryptamine. Alpha-ethyltryptamine was in the 80s available in the United States. I think Upjohn did that for a while. And there's a lot, Paul Stamets, you obviously talked about him earlier, but Alexander Shulgin, have you checked out Alexander Shulgin's work at all? No. So there's a documentary that's relevant called Dirty Pictures. And it is a amazing work about Alexander Shulgin, who was a research chemical alchemist. He had, friends in the DEA. He had friends in every major, company. He used to work for, was it not Pfizer? Who's the company that did, like, in the 50s, man? Like, they had all that stuff. Oh yeah, there it is right there. DuPont. He worked for DuPont. So in like 1950s, he was in like World War II. Okay, let me try to just say the story. Alexander Shulgin was a genius who in when he was like 15, graduated from Yale, like the first person to graduate from Yale. Then he joined the Navy, was in a submarine, read on the boat he read like this encyclopedia of chemistry. So by the time he was out of the Navy, he was a chemical genius. Got a job for DuPont, made all of their fertilizer and pesticides, made them millions of dollars. And then it was the 50s. Like, what do you want to do now, kid? And he's like 25, maybe. And he's like, I think that we have really bad antidepressants. They're pretty poor. And like, again, this is the 50s. Like, they're not much better. And he said then, like, I think if we were to reverse engineer the mescaline molecules from these cactus that I've been studying, we would have, better antidepressants. And they're like, go, take our money, go, kid. And he developed all of these amazing tryptamine-based and phenethylamine-based serotonin uptakes, which were really, a lot of people would associate them with psychedelics, but they're not the same as like an acid or one of those LSD kind of drugs, right? And he has like 2 volumes that are this thick, that are thousands of different research chemicals that he developed. And so you've got, phenethylamines, thousands of them, and then tryptamines, another 1,000 or 2,000 of them. And each one of those were researched, but the way they want to do research is they want to give them to like rodents, and there's only so much you can like learn from that. There's value to that, right? You can see how chemicals work, but it's not the same as like giving it to people. So he ended up taking them himself, and he would do experiments and see like the different kinds of experiences he got and his wife got from each one of these tryptamines and phenethylamines. And basically a lot of them were they changed the way your your biochemistry works afterwards. So a lot of people would like have cures to their depression, and that wasn't something that a lot of pharmaceutical companies were looking for, like a one-hit drug that just stopped you from being depressed, right? Like they wanted something that you continually were taking. So they didn't really like push those in America. But
so you're saying he figured out a one-time cure-all for depression?
Yeah, like tons of different things that have really similar biochemistry. Like there's different ones that are what's the word? Like you don't have like a euphoric feeling. Like there's a lot of them because of the amount of serotonin you experience. There's euphoria. Like you can imagine, like with alcohol, there's euphoria, right? So I think that's probably also why people were so interested after that in looking for serotonin inhibitors, because they wanted to figure out, could we use those in conjunction with an inhibitor so you didn't feel any different than you would normally feel, because we don't want you feeling like high, right? But we don't want you feeling depressed. So if you have these chemicals, then you have everything you need. And also those chemicals help you with sleep, with fingernail growth, with like sex function, with exercise. Like there's all sorts of other reasons why it's not just consciousness. It's like you're healthier. These produce hormones which can help you stay younger, right, and keep you from getting older. And when you don't have those, people end up getting sick, and you need hormone deficiency is like a really dangerous thing. Women experience it menopausally, and men experience like depletion in testosterone. That's all related, right?
Yeah, that's fascinating.
They basically banned a lot of the tryptamines though too, like because they ended up making them analogs. There's like analog laws that associate them with psychedelics. So because of that, like they've tried to make it impossible for people to research, and it's a shame, because that is the solution for a lot of things. Some of the ones that are interesting, like methoxetamine, is not even a tryptamine or a phenethylamine. It's like 2-oxo-PCE. It's like a phenylcyclidide or something like that. What do you call it? I forget, right? It's one of those, it's basically like related to like PCPs, and PCPs were developed for the CIA looking for a non-addictive substitute for codeine, right? So it's not a depressive or an up or downer, it's a disassociative. And so the disassociatives, there's a guy who like lost his hand, had like phantom wrist pain in Israel.
Oh, no.
And he was a chemist, and so he developed this 2-oxo-PCE thing that was revolutionary. It like helped all sorts of people, but in larger doses it had like euphoric and psychedelic effects, because it had it essentially had like an analog to an opioid agonist. So instead of like taking an opiate, like it would like relieve his pain, but also it had serotonin uptake, so that in conjunction is something that like makes you feel euphoric and can be psychedelic. So the UN like banned it.
No.
Like the pharmaceutical companies like lobbied to have it banned in Europe and the United States and everything. So there's like a lot of examples of open source chemistry, neurotransmitter work that's been
The more I learn about the medical industry, the more skeptical I become. It's unfortunate.
But ask your doctors what's right for you.
Yeah, I feel like I was talking about this the other day with someone. I feel like it's kind of an incentive problem, right? We got to fix the incentives in our society. Like the business model cannot be, we need to maximize the addictiveness of our products.
Yeah.
Like that's not a sustainable model for society. I'm sorry. Like, oh, we make gajillions of dollars if they're all addicted to our horrible crap.
I think it's like, it could be even more diabolical, right? Like, because the other thing is, So Shulgin couldn't get people to research these chemicals. So he developed one of these ones he did was 2-5 dimethoxy 4-methylphenylphalamin, right? Which is DOM, okay? And at Woodstock, so he it's an amazing chemical, and it's dangerous, but at the same time, if it's used in really tiny doses, they found in hospitals in certain circumstances, like it can cure Alzheimer's, it can help with people that have been in a coma, it can help people that have had brain injuries, it can help people that have had tumors repair brain. It's all kinds of really useful things about it. Whatever, if you take way more, and it's such a small amount, right? Like we're talking like micrograms or something. Like if you take any more than that, like how many angels are you talking about dancing on the head of a pin? So it's so dangerous that they basically, he wanted it to be experimented and tested. They wouldn't do it. Somehow through either the DEA or like the Hells Angels, through the Hells Angels, they got it to Woodstock and they called it like brown acid. And they were saying, like, you can watch it in the video, like, attention, there's bad brown acid being circulated. And like a bunch of people like freaked out and thought they were like putting hands through each other's stomachs and like we're, like completely out of control, right? So I mean, those things are probably really dangerous. Like they are definitely really dangerous as well, but like, I think that's the thing. It's a tragedy because doctors could have used these things in better circumstances. I'm really curious. I'd like to look into the ecstasy therapy sessions in the 1980s because doctors were prescribing patients in like the Midwest, right? And who didn't know anything about it. Like, okay, well, we're going to have you in a room and you're going to take this new treatment. It's completely outside of the idea of it being like a drug, right? And they were giving like parents like who'd been in relationships for like 40 years and didn't drink and things. They're giving them ecstasy. And so you got to wonder about those, like how did that, what's the deal with that, right?
No idea, man.
It could have been better.
I wish we could do more medical research on those types of things, psychedelics and whatnot, because there's probably like the more powerful it is, like it's kind of like power in general. It can be used for good or bad. It's like, yeah, it's scary, it's harmful, but like there's probably a lot of benefits behind it if used properly. You know what I mean?
There's like the Multidisciplinary Association for Psychedelic Studies in Santa Cruz, which is, I'm pretty sure funded by George Soros, but albeit a pretty interesting group that is doing some pretty cool work. And they try to help vets that have been through a lot. So they try to do like dopamine uptake and serotonin uptake during therapy, which is interesting.
That's pretty cool.
All right. Now that we've done our PSA for like neurodivergent studies.
Yeah. So did you want to get into the paranormal as well today, Andreas?
Oh, okay. What's your thoughts on what do you mean? What do you think about paranormal?
I mean, you were asking me about if I've ever experienced demonic
right.
experience.
Well, I really wanted to do that with Chad because Chad's been wanting to do that, but we could still do it. Actually, I think I can probably, if you want to just talk about it, because we talked about it a little bit before. I think it's interesting. Do you want to talk about it now? What do you think? How do you feel?
I can do either or. Are you feeling tired, Andreas? Do you need?
I'm not tired because I'm gonna do another show in like an hour and a half anyway.
Okay.
But we could talk about it. You want to talk about it? Let's talk about it.
Let's talk about it. Why not? Right.
Okay. So we've been doing like the Mormon exorcism theory or series, right? And so you guys saw like an episode we did before last week where I was like MIA. But Seth, who used to be a missionary himself.
Yes.
In Taiwan.
I was in Taiwan. 我会说中文，我在台湾生活了4年，我2年是传教，然后2年是在那边教英文，然后我在台湾，我曾经住高雄、台南、台中、台北，新营还有马公这些城市都住过了，我很喜欢那边。Oh, sorry, I just got on a little Chinese rant.
No one's ever going to believe that. They're going to think it was all AI generated. Yeah.
So I was just talking about all the different places in Taiwan that I lived over 4 years. So I was a missionary in Taiwan, and I didn't have a ton of like paranormal experiences in Taiwan, but I did have a few. But I've had more paranormal experiences in my personal life outside of Taiwan. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So we can get to all of them. Why not, right?
Yeah, all right. I'm interested.
So I think I started having like paranormal experiences when I was around 16. It was mostly like sleep paralysis type stuff, but it felt like a demon, right? Like I'd be asleep in bed, or I'd be struggling to sleep, or vice, like barely waking up, or struggling to fall back asleep type of thing. And I'd have like this feeling of like overwhelming feeling of like almost like magical gravitational pressure on my chest. and like my lungs are just like being squished by this force. I'm like, and I'm like struggling to breathe because it's heavy on my chest and maybe on my throat a little bit. I'm just like, like I feel like I'm gonna die if this continues because I can't breathe properly. And I'm like, oh no, some like paranormal entity is like trying to suffocate me. I'm gonna get murdered by this freaking demon. What do I do? I'm like calling out for Jesus, calling out for help, but I can't even talk because I'm like, you know what I mean? And my brother, you know, I slept with my brother, had a separate bed. We slept in the same bedroom. And he usually is a deep sleeper, but you know, it's like weird. Like I'm like barely eking out, like help me, you know what I mean? Like barely audible. He like wakes up like abnormally. He's like, what? And like as soon as my brother's voice like entered the room, it was as if his voice scared away the demon. And suddenly my chest went back to normal and I could breathe. I was like, wow, the power of my brother is so immense that he scared away the demon. He must be a great soul. You know what I mean? I'm like trying to use Mormon ideology to figure out what's going on.
But did you feel, so what do you think, do you think you were just like super anxious then? Like, you know, because you try to like debunk yourself.
Oh
right?
yeah. The atheistic perspective on what the heck was going on.
Yeah.
You know,
like, what's your atheistic perspective first? Yeah.
Yeah. My atheistic perspective is like, I was really abusive of my body as a teenager in the sense that I have too much self-discipline for my own good. I was like I skipped 3 grades. I was like going to ASU, like I was going to the university when I was 16, and I was just working my ass off getting like 4 hours of sleep every night. And so my body was like stressed like to the point of madness, and I was using my self-discipline like body, you obey me. If I want you to work extra hours, you work extra hours. And so I think that I think my body was just I think the paralysis was just a stress response. And like the demonic interpretation in psychology, that's called predictive coding. Predictive coding is when you have ambiguous stimuli and your mind is trying to interpret it. It's like, well, how should we interpret it? And so your mind has all these biases, these interpretational biases. And so I was a Mormon and I believed in demons, and you know, I was a sinner and I was a teenager. I'm like, oh, I'm so guilty.
What do you think you did that was a sin, like that you might have brought a demon home with you?
Oh, you know, teenagers are horny as hell. And when your religion says you're not allowed to be horny, you're just constantly guilty. And so like under my Mormon paradigm, it's like, oh, the demon is, you know, I'm an evil sinner and this demon is punishing me for my sins. So I'm interpreting my body's stress response as a demonic punishment for my sins. You know what I mean?
Okay.
Yeah.
I wonder, yeah. There's two, like there's two things there, right? Because on one hand, it's like, I believe in Wilhelm Reich. I believe in the mass psychology of fascism. I believe in like the sexual authoritarianism, that you control someone's sexuality, control a people's sexuality, and then you can use their release and their frustration for war, for creativity. You can control someone through their sexuality. You can control people, a whole people. So I do believe in that, but I also believe in like the South Park incubus and succubus chef episode. You know, the idea that there's probably like some kind of weird evil spirit out there that's like, you know, at night coming for young blonde boys. I wouldn't be surprised. You should have been,
right.
You know, you should have been like protected, Seth. I'm sorry.
Wait, say that again.
I mean, you know, there's probably some like weird evil, you know, with the incubus and the succubus. You know what that is, right?
Okay. So you're very open-minded about
about demons? Sure. Yeah.
About the ontological reality.
Oh yeah, like would I burn a Ouija board if it came in my house? Yeah, at this point.
Yeah.
You know? Yeah, I think you should be careful. Like you shouldn't like test or like, you know, risk like certain things probably,
Sure.
you know, just in case. I'm a little superstitious. Sure.
Okay.
Yeah. But like I don't know, like the idea of like a succubus that is you know, like in the dark, that is like taking over your room and like is, you know, molesting you in your sleep and like, you know, taking your energy. Like I think that could be very heavy, that and it's incubus, because the succubus comes with the incubus, which is this like horrifying like masculine demon, right?
Yeah. I think now I forgot about this, but I think that I was like, while I was a Mormon and while I was on my mission, I interpreted myself as frequently being attacked by a succubus.
There you go.
I've had that type of experience too.
Very particular. That's very particular. Okay. You can also talk about that if you wanted to.
But I want to add to this sleep paralysis. I had an even better sleep paralysis story. When I was 18, I was still living a high stress lifestyle, And I had sleep paralysis again, but this time I had tactile hallucination, tactile sense of touch. So while I couldn't breathe, right, I felt like the gravity on my chest. I've never seen anything during sleep paralysis, but I felt like this crazy gravity, and I felt the suffocation, and I felt the tactile sensation of 5 fingers on my throat during the sleep paralysis. So that, and it felt very real. It felt like there was literally 5 fingers on my throat. And at the time when I was 18, I was like, wow, like I've heard the voice of God before, but I've never touched the hand of God before. I'm like, I feel like touching God's hand is like a bigger testimony than like hearing God. So I'm like, wow, being touched by like a demon, that's like, I have more knowledge of the reality of demons than I do of God himself at this point. That was my Mormon perspective. I was like, wow, that's significant. You know what I mean?
Dang. I mean, did you think about like things that were going on that around that time that would have like let a demon into your life, or like would have been in your home that would have grabbed your neck? Like
nothing super special, just high stress and, you know, normal guilty feelings, religious induced guilty feelings.
There's got to be something to it, man. I don't know. Like, you know what I mean? Because like, wouldn't there be a trigger beyond just if you're able to suppress it? Like, why would it be? I don't know. It feels like there's a trigger. There has to be a trigger. Yeah.
I mean, I don't know.
I guess it could be just pent up stress, but like a trigger makes more sense to me.
Sure. Well, I mean,
like also at the time, did you think about it? Like you didn't at the time think it was atheistic. At the time, were you like, what am I doing to cause this?
Yeah. It was I was interpreting it completely metaphysically as a demon. And I was like, maybe because of my sins, I'm like opening the door to being attacked. Maybe I'm like a target because, you know, I have the potential to be a good Mormon and I have the potential to like save souls, and he's trying to like bring me down so I can't, you know, unleash my potential. You know,
good. I'm glad you thought that. That's what I think. That's
a mixture of I suck and I got potential.
That's Occam's razor right there.
Right. So in atheistic reflection, I'm like, it's just a tactile hallucination, stress induced. Yeah, nothing that crazy about that. If you're not sleeping properly, if you're sleeping 4 hours a day every single day, you're going to be dreaming while you're awake because your body's got to process the dreaming chemicals, and so you're going to start hallucinating. And why not tactile hallucination, right?
Yeah, true. Yeah. I had some weird dream where I felt like I was lying in sand and I could feel all the sand, but I felt like I was awake, you know?
Yeah. So on my mission, I had a crazy investigator, right? There was this investigator. He was kind of just he was a nerd. He was the archetype of a nerd. Wore glasses. The only reason he wanted to hang out with us was to learn English. He claimed he was an atheist. He's like, yeah, I think the religious stuff is bullshit, but I'll tolerate it so I can practice English with you. And so we're like, oh, well, maybe we can maybe he'll be touched by the teachings. And so maybe it'll be worth it.
Sweet blue eyes, right?
Oh yeah, so sweet. So we were trying to like teach him the lessons. He was completely polite, but you know, he didn't believe anything. Well, he disappears. Like he just disappears for 2 weeks and we can't get a hold of him. We're like, where did this guy go? He used to be so willing to hang out and meet up and learn. He just disappeared. And then like out of the blue, we get the most insane phone call of my entire life. We get this phone call and he's like hyperventilating on the phone. He's like, and he's speaking English, like broken English. He's like, Seth, I know that I couldn't speak English fluently, but now I can speak English fluently. And it's because I've been touched by God. I've been given the gift of tongues. And I saw an angel, and Satan, he tried to kill me in the forest. And the angel came down and protected me. And the whole host of heaven came down, and I received the gift of tongues. They touched me, and I've been made whole. And now I want to get baptized. And he's just like hyperventilating as he goes on. And Satan tried to kill me. He was on a roll. I was like, wow, he's got like a Joseph Smith level experience. He's getting attacked by Satan and helped by angels in the forest. Wow. So I was like, we got to set up an appointment. He wants to get baptized. I'm like, I'm mind blown. I'm like, as a Mormon, I have a bias to believe all this, but then part of my brain is like, this is unbelievable. You know what I mean? So we meet up with him to try to discuss like his experience and what was going on. And he while we were talking with him, he started experiencing what I interpreted as demonic possession in front of me, right? He was telling me his story about how Satan was actually trying to possess him.
So if you come to this guy's house and he's like taking a bunch of drugs or not, like what's the deal with this guy who's had a vision of Joseph Smith and speaking?
Yeah. So the interesting thing is my Chinese, I had been in Taiwan for just 1 year. So my Chinese wasn't good enough to fully understand. Like he started explaining things in Chinese and I was a little bit struggling to get all the details. It was
the ravings of a madman. It was a little hard. Yeah.
He had some wild story, and my interpretation of the pieces of the story was something to the effect of he went on a camping trip with his school. It was like a little excursion, and I think that he probably was on some medication, and while he was camping, he got off the medication, and I don't know, like some medical complication, and so I think that maybe these experiences were.
So like he stopped taking SSRIs or something, and then all of a sudden had a bunch of like serotonin uptake.
I think there's a medical correlation to all this, but yeah, he was like absolutely. He was talking about his story about how the devil was or Satan was trying to possess him and was trying to get him to do evil things and do some evil things to his family members and maybe do some perverted things to some people. And he's like, I don't want to do that, but Satan wants me to do it. And he's like shifting between these modes of like, yeah, and no, yeah, no. Like he's going like all over the place here. And then he like I'm starting to see his personality shift. It was the weirdest thing I've ever seen. Like he's talking like the sincere, like, and like, you know, like a polite nerd. He's like, oh, this is what was happening to me. And I'm worried about this. And then he starts getting into this like perverted mode. He's like, ooh, hey, what's up, Seth? And he's like acting like he's trying to flirt with me. And then he like resists it. He's like, oh, whoa, sorry, that wasn't me. I didn't mean to do that. That was impolite. I'm sorry. I'm so sorry. And then he like gets into this sneaky, sly mode again. And it's insane. I can't believe this actually happened to me. He tried, he stood up and he tried to wiggle his bum at me. Like a TikToking girl, like doing like a little, like he's like flirting it with me. He's like, come get it. You want this? I'm like, no, I'm not gay. And then he freaks out. He's like, oh, sorry. I don't know what happened. Something came over me. I'm not like that. I don't know. Like, he's like sliding in and out of these different personalities in real time. I'm like, holy crap. What are we dealing with? And then he goes absolutely off the rear end. Like he starts going like this. He's like, Satan's coming. I can hear him. I hear his footsteps. Satan's coming. Oh no, hurry, duck under the table. Can he see us? Can you hear us? Shh, be quiet. Satan's coming. And he like goes on like a rampage, like just constantly obsessing over Satan's nearby. And then we tell him like, well, we're Mormons, we're missionaries. We have the power of Jesus Christ. We can give you a blessing. We can cast out the devils. And so we tried to cast it out and like nothing changed. We're like, oh, that sucks. And then, but we told him like, you need to believe in the authority, right? The authority that comes through the priesthood power.
Like voodoo. I don't understand that. Oh, okay.
You got to believe in the authority and it'll kick out the spirits. And then like his mind like latches onto the idea of authority. He's like, oh, that's a solution. Authority. And he like takes his cell phone and he chucks it. He's like, authority. He like tried to smash Satan's face with his cell phone. His cell phone shatters into a million pieces. Then he looks the other way, takes his watch off, like his like expensive watch. He's like, authority, and chucks his watch, shatters that. And we're just like deer in the headlights. Two like 20-year-old missionaries like, what? We're not trained for this. Like, wow. And then like he just gets up and he just like runs away, like screaming authority over and over as he just like runs off into the distance. As we're just left behind in a stunned silence. Like we're like, so should we call him? Oh wait, his cell phone is in tatters.
Sounds possessed to memory, man. Sounds possessed to me.
Yeah.
Basically, everyone is possessed anyway. I think that's the thing. You know, if you think about it, like, what does it mean to be possessed? Especially with what you've been talking about. Like, if in an atheist perspective, you can think of marketing as, a form of magic to possess, and people being possessed by, the spirit of Christmas, right? Possessed by, their love of fashion. I don't know. I think there's a lot of things like idolatry, symbolatry, sigil magic. There's conscious possession. People are definitely, the fact that he's got these like negative shadow issues with homoeroticism, that he's projecting. But I don't know, it also does sound really demonic. It does sound really demonic, right? Like that is archetype.
Yeah.
Maybe the archetype is related to the real thing.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, it does seem demonic, and that's how if your bias, if your cognitive bias is to interpret data.
What did you think? Did you believe you were gonna get the demon out of him when you were exercising him with the power of Melchizedek? Were you just like, it's gonna work anyway, so I'm cool?
That's a good question. Like, how much confidence did I have that it would work?
Yeah.
I think I was kind of neutral. I was like, well, this is what we're supposed to do. Let's see what happens. So
We'll
maybe
see what happens.
maybe under a Christian paradigm, you're like, oh, you didn't have enough faith, Seth. You were too neutral.
I'm not a voodoo guy. I don't really like that. I think the idea that like that he had to have faith is kind of like downplaying the idea of the power of Melchizedek. Like if you're trying to say you got this endowment of power, then that thing should be like a flashlight that turns on and off, as far as I'm concerned. Maybe there's certain things about what faith is. We could like argue about that, because I don't think faith has to be like belief without evidence. I think that's a really weird definition of faith, right? Like that we should do away with bad definitions instead of doing away with words, right?
Mm-hmm.
But no, I think it's possible that you didn't feel like you had the power of Melchizedek, or that maybe genuinely that's not, an authority that's like working, or, there's a lot of things that people could question about that. If you're in a situation where this exorcism is taking place and you feel like you need to do it more or again or something like that, and you ended up not being able to find this guy again.
No, yeah, he disappeared off the radar because no cell phone.
Well, that's interesting. So like you exorcised the demon out of him and then he runs off all crazy. That is pretty, that's pretty, that's tantamount to an exorcism. And he's screaming authority. So he's screaming authority. So he's staying in his own authority as he runs out. So there's a success there, at least.
Yeah, I'm really curious because like after that experience, I thought it was so like I was genuinely like worried about his well-being, and like he said that in the past, like he said he wanted to get baptized. So like my thought is like, yeah, he disappeared. Like missionaries, we get transferred to different areas like every month or 2 months. So I got transferred to a different area. So my fear was that like the two of us who witnessed it would depart. There'd be new guys, and the new guys wouldn't like. This guy would show up at church and he'd be like, I want to get baptized. And the missionaries wouldn't know the backstory. So I took like 2 pages of paper and I wrote down this experience. I'm like, if you ever meet this guy, this is his name. This is what happened. This is what you need to know about him getting ready to join the church. You know what I mean?
Wow.
So it'd be fascinating if there's another pair of missionaries that they're part of the second epoch of the story. You know what I mean? I have no idea what happened.
I really wish we could look him
that.
up. And we should find his name. We should look into him.
Yeah,
it's
it'd
crazy.
be interesting to see where his path went.
Exorcisms are interesting. I think a lot of people are possession sounds like a good reductionism of what a lot of people are experiencing. A lot of people don't seem to be in control of themselves, not completely. You could blame it on gut parasites. You could blame it on, ingrained memories and trauma, post-traumatic stress, traumatized youth, media hypnosis. But all those things kind of seem demonic in their own way.
Gut parasites are demons.
Okay, maybe not all gut parasites, but like there's something weird about that whole idea.
Yeah, I think that there's probably lots of data that like gut parasite data could probably be confused into the interpretation of a demon. I think that's very plausible.
Yeah, also the idea like what is a demon? Because like something that can transfer from one person to another, that can like survive, is kind of like pseudo immortal, has a way of working with neurotransmitters.
Yeah. Oh, you and your linguistic attempt to rescue words.
Something to do. I don't know.
What's wrong with just saying, okay, demons are like a supernatural reality that does XYZ, and we've realized that there's a physical reality that does XYZ, and so we don't need the supernatural word that does XYZ because we have the physical word that does XYZ.
I think it's an overarching pattern that's still there. Like all those things together, it's like, why do we call Hurricane Katrina, or something like that? Like you can still have kind of a pattern that you see emerge. Like, yeah, these people are possessed by a demon. Like it's, I don't know. It might be a dangerous thing to do because that's close to depersonification or depersonalizing someone. You might be prone to like not respect someone if you think that they're, this person's not even a person, right? Because so I think you should be careful not to do that. But
I think the important thing is causal chains, right? So if you think there's a supernatural demon that's doing XYZ, then that means you think that there's a supernatural causal chain. And so it's like, oh, I'm sinning too much, therefore demon. You know what I mean? But when there's a different causal chain, it's like, oh, I'm not sleeping enough, therefore demon. It's like, maybe I should fix my sleep and stop worrying about the unrelated, thing.
Apparently, people that sleep only like 4 or 5 hours a night live the longest. Like people that sleep less live longer. People that sleep longer live less. There's like a thing about that. I don't sleep a lot.
That sounds wrong, but sure.
No, like check out the data. I think there's also wait a second ago. What did you say? You're talking about
The linguistic, supernatural versus physical causal chains.
Yeah, so it's okay to have like so with Mormonism, like it's okay to have a material explanation for everything. It's like a hyper materialist religion in a sense. Like the idea that you fast and take care of your body because your body is this like God temple that you're supposed to have these consciousness, and you could have now you're making it more like Star Wars. Now it's like Episode 1 with midichlorians because you're saying consciousness are actually like counted up and they have an accumulation. So I don't know, that makes sense to me. If demons or parasites or something to that effect, all of a sudden you've got a perfect scientific explanation. You can call them parasites still, but then like you have a question about what is a parasite, what is a virus. When you look at a virus, it looks like a little robot. Is a bacteriophage conscious or not conscious? So I think it gets back to the idea of like, can consciousness just like run these systems? And it looks like that's what a demon is, in a sense. So I'm not done with the word yet, but I do see like all these points you're making that he took drugs or stopped taking drugs, and he has probably like psychological issues or like personal issues at least. But I mean, like still, you laid your hands down, you barely knew what was going on. He didn't either, and he runs out screaming authority, like which is God's English, which we should probably talk about sometime because I have a whole new like thing with John Dee in English, basically. But it's God's language, basically.
Language.
Yeah. Not really, but this is what John Dee. I think John Dee really believed when he recreated Shakespeare in English that it was God's language, like that it's Enochian. John Dee thought it was like Enochian, and that's why they speak this way.
You're not talking about the Mormon. Am I getting confused? Who John Dee is?
Yeah, John Dee is a alchemist from like the 16th century, 1600s.
Okay.
John Dee was a mathematician, astronomer, alchemist who worked for the Queen of England and was involved with witchcraft, etc. Right, and also was friends with Ed DeVere and William Cecil. And so they created the plays, which Shakespeare is, this illiterate actor from Stratford got credit for. But John Dee also did all sorts of crazy magic and stuff like that. He was super into Enochian and thought like the ancient Jews had lost the...
That's a Pokemon. What are you talking about?
Yeah, this is his Monask hieroglyphica. You might really like...
That's not a language. That's a Pokemon.
You might really like Monas hieroglyphica, a complex emblem from various astrological symbols, elements of Latin wordplay.
I think language is a barbaric concept, and we need to destroy all human-created languages, and we need to follow the Old Testament and turn the entire world needs to be turned to a pure language, and we need to use AI to generate a new pure language. Okay,
you're super close. John Dee did all of that except for the AI. Instead, he used like a hat and looked into it like Joseph Smith did.
So he had a pure language revealed to him?
Yeah, by angels dancing on like a rock.
Yeah.
Yeah. And so his and if you look at like how English used to be spoken before this, it was like Beowulf, right? And like people spoke this weird old English, and then they created this new English. Right, like the way people speak is based on this. So his idea of like Enochian transformation of English, and so we're speaking and it's the Shakespearean English, the Holy Bible, and the Book of Mormon. They're all written in that kind of Shakespearean, John Dee Enochian English.
So like a lot of philosophy problems, they reduce to a confusion of language. That was one of the comments that Wittgenstein said. And so I guess if this language is able to resolve all philosophic paradoxes, then I'm on board. But I'm very skeptical of that.
Yeah, this is fair. Well,
I think one of the easiest way to see flaws in language is to look through the concept of opposites, right? Like remember how I like to reduce things to building blocks? I'm like, well, language, it should be structured like building blocks. You should be able to build any word to represent any concept. It's like, what if I want the opposite of X? Is there a word for the opposite of X? It's like, well, there's a lot of instances where the opposite of a word does not exist. You know what I mean?
Yeah, maybe.
So
I don't know. I don't have an answer for that yet. I think that's an interesting point.
Well,
opposites are important.
It points to the incompleteness of language. It points to the insufficiency of the building blocks.
What if by next time I can find you the opposite of X?
I mean, when I said X, I was a placeholder, not I was not literally.
No, okay, but I could probably literally find the opposite of X because like
every single possible instance of
X. just for the letter X, like in the English language, because we're talking about this idea. It's an interesting abstraction. Like, what is the opposite of the letter X? Even if we're not talking all of infinity.
so then you have to get into the philosophy of opposites, where there are different types of opposites, which just shows that language is fundamentally equivocable, because when you say the word opposite, do you mean logical opposite or do you mean polar opposite? One word has two completely different meanings. Now we're confused because we don't know what the hell we're talking about, because language is so insufficient at conveying meaning.
No, not conveying meaning, at being distinct. Your issue is with distinction, and you don't need everything to be, there doesn't need to be a single answer for everything, right?
Almost every single word has like multiple definitions across multiple dictionaries. It's like,
and that's
how are we communicating with such a broken structure?
Maybe that's not broken to be having different ways of saying something, right? Like, so like I can be in Santa Cruz, in Live Oak, in Capitola, in SoCal, in the Summit Mountains, all at the same time, and they're all different things, and it's all true, right? Like, you don't have to be all in one or the other, because these are just, and these things are just like psychological expressions of something. What is Turkey Europe or is Turkey Arabia? What does that mean? Like, it clearly isn't a continent. So we're culturally deciding what a place is, or we're psychologically deciding what conditions we're expressing in. So that gives us more ways of communicating, not less. So being distinct is probably not what we need, because if we want to be more distinct, then we'd have Orwellian English, because it would just be like, we have good and double plus good, right?
Yeah, I mean, like, there might be a point to having the flexibility. Like, the danger is,
otherwise you have ungood.
I mean, the way brains work, I think the way brains are structured, it basically makes equivocation part of the structure. Like, it's almost like we're built to be abstracting entities. Like, here's a dumb example. I think the word is excoriate. I believe excoriate, like the way it's usually used, it's like you're basically criticizing someone. He was publicly excoriated in the town square. You know what I mean? To censure. But like, so there's like an abstract meaning, which is like the social meaning, but like the more concrete meaning is like, it's to like peel off a layer of skin, right? And so it's almost like, well, we have the concrete meaning, which is to rip off the skin. And then like the social meaning is like, I'm going to rip off your social skin. Like, I'm going to use words to like rip off your reputation, kind of a thing. You know what I mean? So it's like, we're taking concrete things and we're making metaphorical abstractions, and we're using the same word for the concrete thing and the same word for the abstraction. You know what I mean?
That's what people don't use if they don't know the whole language. So like, it's raining cats and dogs or something like that. That becomes an expression usually in like first generation immigrant communities. Like, they'll create expressions that use slang, right? And slang then becomes Americana, but that's not the same as if we're trying to create like scientific language. And English is really useful because you can create words with it. Germans like to use American words because it's hard to create German words, right? So there's something about that, like French, Latin influence, like that you're able to compile new words from, and that's from Sanskrit. So it has some of the same traits as Sanskrit. English is like a Swahili of barbaric languages, and so the fact that people can communicate with it is pretty interesting. Like, we can create the word like television. I don't know. That's interesting. I think English is probably a little more special than we give it credit. I hate it, kind of, but it's cool.
Oh, I mean, grammatically, it's a nightmare, but maybe meaning for the conveyance of meaning, it might be better than average. But yeah, I feel like we need like we need a language that's more, it's unambiguous, a distinct language. It's like, okay, maybe we use English when we're trying to be flexible with words, but like when we have like, what is morality? What does it mean to be real? When we have like a philosophic confusion, it's like, let's switch from English to like the engineering language. Like, let's engineer the building blocks of what we're talking about with language. You know what I mean? Maybe a two-pronged approach might be the best way.
Sounds legit. All right, I gotta get ready for my next show, so we'll have to do the rest of the exorcism stuff next time, I think. But
sounds good, man.
Feel free to join Wednesday Ultra. We could get you on then. That'd be pretty sweet.